For more on this, let's bring in Sama'a Al-Hamdani. She's a Yemeni journalist and an analyst with the Navanti Group, a research firm. Welcome to our program.
Hi.
So talk to us about how this fight over the port of Hodeidah, clearly a strategic location here, but what is it doing in terms of humanitarian situation? Because this is where most of the aid comes through.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, this is where the majority of the aid comes to Yemen, to 24 million people approximately. And this port has already had a humanitarian crisis in the sense that the aid that goes through there is supposed to aid a community that is impoverished, that is facing famine, that is really, really struggling. And so in a sense, the war since March 2015 doubled this crisis, and the famine increased by 60%. And so we are watching this and we're thinking, okay, you have two things that are kind of challenging to a Yemeni, in the sense that the Emiratis and the Saudis are saying that they have to go in through the ground to win this war against the Houthis. And at the same time, you're worried about the safety of the humans there. You're worried about, if this war takes more than a week, it could be really disastrous.
Are you surprised that this crisis and the humanitarian disaster has really lingered on for all these years?
Am I surprised that it lingered? I think not, to be honest, because we have issued statements that are shocking to the world. The statistics that came out of Yemen are really scary.
And let me stop you for a moment and tell you about those statistics. According to the UN, by the way, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, 22 million in need of humanitarian aid, 8 million at the risk of starvation, and thousands died last year from cholera or cholera-related illnesses.
Yeah,
those are staggering numbers.
The situation in Yemen is one of, I think, 4 in the world that are man-made humanitarian disasters, meaning that if the war wasn't ongoing, it wouldn't be this bad. And so we've known this all along, and we've also talked about Hodeidah being a very important port, and how the Arab coalition was trying to enter through there. And during Obama's administration, they said that Hodeidah was a red line.
Where do things stand as far as diplomacy and UN efforts? Certainly looking on the ground, there is no sign of diplomacy and there is no sign of peace.
Unfortunately, that is the case. We have a new UN envoy to Yemen, Martin Griffiths, and a lot of people are optimistic that now you have a British citizen with the backing of a British government kind of mediating and coming in to represent the UN in the midst of all these power players. And what we see is that, and we've said this before on other shows, that there's a lack of a genuine will to peace on all sides, whether it's the Houthis or the Emiratis or the Saudis or the Yemeni government. It seems that everybody wants to have a victory in some sense. And that's what's terrifying about the battle in Hodeidah right now. We understand the importance of the port in the way that it delivers aid to all Yemenis, in the way that it helps, feed a lot of people. But at the same time, we are now looking at a battle where everybody's willing to fight to death on all sides.
Are you surprised this crisis seemingly is not getting much attention in Western media?
I think it's, there's always that term that they coined, is Yemen the forgotten war? I think Yemen is not the forgotten war. Yemen is the ignored war. It's not forgotten. We read about it, we see it. It's just there isn't much of a will to do anything. What's interesting, though, and of note, is that the American government has had some sort of group within it, specifically the Senate and the Congress, issue statements that they do not want the U.S. to back this effort, just because they understand the consequences of the human cost of this war.
The human cost, indeed. So many innocent civilians caught in the middle of this war. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.